Hi, everybody. So let's do quick intros and also sound check. Dominic, do you want to kick us off with a quick intro, just a general overview of what you do and sort of the focus that's relevant for the conversation today?
Sure. So I'm Dominic Ruiz. I come from the healthy building world, so looking not only at environmental sustainability, but also the sustainability of humans and buildings mostly, but also looking at that through a community and city level lens. So a lot of my work is now looking at the convergence or the nexus of sustainability and public health.
Great. And Jacqueline, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm at the Center for Sustainable Urban Development at Columbia, and my work focuses on a variety of urban sustainability initiatives, but I do have a very strong focus on sustainable transport and land use, and also how to mobilize to get change in these sectors.
Great. And Henry?
Hi, everyone. My name is Henry Gordon Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Agritecture. We're a global urban agriculture consulting firm. So we empower entrepreneurs all around the world to plan urban farms of all kinds, rooftop farms, soil farms, greenhouse, vertical. We also advise governments and corporations on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So I am John Opperman, Executive Director of Earth Day Initiative. We are a nonprofit organization that puts together large-scale Earth Day events, and we also have sustainable awareness and green living programs throughout the year. People can check us out at dojustonething.org. That's do just one thing with the number 1. We have a podcast that we just launched that we're featuring there called the Parts Per Million podcast. So the conversation today is focused on green cities, and throughout the day today, for anyone who's been tuning into the panels, it's a lot of discussions about sort of like, what is the future that we want to see? What is the future, the sort of ideal vision, and then how do we get there? What are the obstacles in the way, and then how do we get to that sort of future that we would all like to see? So each one of you comes at the issue from slightly different angles, and we're looking at this sort of city overall, whether it's transportation or the built environment. So kind of starting out with that big vision as the theme for the whole day of panels, maybe we can take a minute to just go through like, okay, what is the thing that your organization or you as an individual are working toward? What is that vision of a more sustainable city? And particularly from the angle that you are focused on. Jacqueline, do you want to start us out?
Sure. So I would like people to imagine a beautiful country scene or a forest scene. Think about the green and the sounds and how lovely that is. And then think about the excitement of being in a city with all these wonderful different people and activities around you, and then combine those. So the vision that I have and a lot of my colleagues have is really making transformations in cities that give you the clean air, that give you the quiet, that give you the green and the mental well-being that comes with, but also allows you to live in a diverse and exciting place full of activity, which is why we love to live in cities and why cities are so productive. And most specifically, I do work on transportation, which has to be looked at with land use. So if you live in a place where you have a lot of different shops and things going on, you may not have to travel as much because you can get the services nearby. So fixing land use can help you travel less, because most of us don't really like, traveling in a car, which is like the dominant mode, hours every day. The other part of that is really improving various modes of transport to give people more choice. So if you do need to go out and get something, you could take a bike, or you could take a scooter, or you could take a really great train, or maybe you could take a car share that's electric. So it's really quiet and clean. So, how do we move towards a city that gives you lots of choice, that's really clean and green, that feels somewhat like, you know, those environments I described earlier, the forest, the farm, and yet is, you know, a city in all the ways that make cities really wonderful.
Great. And then moving into more of the built environment, Dominic, do you want to lay out that vision?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways you could go with this, but one, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is making sustainability effortless for the city dweller, and that it just becomes a part of your everyday life. And, you know, I think of like the future, what is the ideal future? But I actually realized, and I learned this in graduate school when we were on a trip in Portland, Oregon, that the future in some ways is I mean, it's already here. I mean, we have the ability to do a lot of these things that Jacqueline mentioned. And I always think about this trip to Portland State University where we walked through like a building and there were ellipticals and treadmills, all of which generated a certain amount of electricity for the building. And so I think of that as a city, at the city scale, when we live in a society of kind of that instant gratification, how can you use that to drive more sustainable behaviors in a way that, you know, really excites people and engages people and gets them to participate? And so I've been studying a little bit like the running trails where it collects kinetic energy that powers the lights. And I see that as being the ideal next sort of like the next step, the next evolution of getting people at a mass scale to participate in a way that's meaningful to them at a very individual level.
Great. And Henry, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the future of cities are concerned, we believe that cities are a threat to, as a result of climate change. And so for us, it's really about helping them adapt to climate change. And we think there's two parties that really matter in that impact. And the first one is really the cities themselves. They need to understand how different types of agriculture could be integrated into their planning to achieve certain sustainability and resilience impacts. Right now, agriculture is very complicated. It's very diverse. And so it's hard for parties that are not familiar with agricultural operations to digest that and make strategic decisions. So we kind of go through a process of breaking urban agriculture models into typologies, because we don't think that there's one size fits all. We think that the future of cities is going to have a diversity of local agriculture and urban agriculture solutions. So we want to break them down to the data so that cities can do what they're good at, which is planning scenarios for highways and apartment complexes and trying to predict growth and resources as it relates to that. And so we want to do that for agriculture. We also want to empower the energy of the social entrepreneurs to solve this problem. We need more farmers. We've had declining numbers of farmers in the United States and in developed countries across the world. What's exciting is that local urban agriculture can inspire them to get involved in the sustainability movement. So we also need to empower them with the pathways to kind of fill in the gaps in the cities to grow this food. That's going to be very important. And this is a really important issue. 80% of our food consumption is coming from cities in 2050. So really cities need to be at the table in planning the food systems, and entrepreneurs need to be part of that solution. We need to kind of restore the idea that we don't build cities and develop them without the resources needed to feed the people in them. So our vision is a city where those pathways are seamless, where the city understands different methods, and where the entrepreneurs can fulfill those gaps by developing viable farming models.
Thanks for that. And kind of following up on a few different things that you were talking about in terms of the challenges, I told you guys beforehand, one of the things that I wanted to lay out is kind of what's the vision and then how do we get there and what are the roadblocks in the way? So Dominic, one of the things that you had mentioned that I hear a lot in terms of sustainability and sort of charting path the climate solutions that we want to see is in a lot of cases, the solutions are there. So then that begs the question, like, why don't we have them then? Like, what are the policies? What are the societal roadblocks? Like, what are the economic roadblocks? Like, why are the things not happening? You hear all the time about how renewable energy has reached a level that it's actually better economically than fossil fuels for us to pursue, but then it's not really happening at the scale that it should be. So what do you all think about that in terms of in the areas of expertise that you have? I would ask this to each one of you. Is the technology already there, but then there's other obstacles, or is it that we still need to develop the technology, or how does that intersection between technology and everything else that creates the sustainability landscape, how do those interact?
Yeah,
I'll jump in or go for it.
who wants to go first? Yeah. I guess in the realm of agriculture, I kind of mentioned some of them, which is that cities, don't actually have the policies in place to implement all the urban farms that people want to build or that investors want to support. So that needs to be clear. Zoning needs to be optimized. Agriculture is not recognized as a use in most cities across the globe. So it just doesn't have a place to be developed safely. The technology exists even for high-tech methods like controlled environment agriculture that use less water and are resilient to storms. And they have pros and cons. Again, I've said that there's different pros and cons to these methods, but that technology exists, but it could always improve. And so LED technology and climate control management to reduce the energy demand of these systems will be critical for them to scale and make a meaningful impact on food security. I think the operations gap is a big problem. Even though the investments going into this sector, and even though some policy is starting to mature, there really aren't enough operators to fill in all these farms effectively, again, because of that talent gap I mentioned with us pushing agriculture out of the cities. We've also pushed the talent for agriculture out of the cities. So there has to be investment into training as well. In addition to that, that's quite difficult and complicated too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dominic, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, I think at the most basic level, the biggest challenge is really buy-in at the end of the day, and that can be driven by policies and incentives, definitely, and also, I'm thinking of what you're saying about zoning and how effective zoning is and changing people's ideas or mindsets around certain uses and how they can be activated. And I mean, and also just the business case. I think as much progress as we've made to build the business case around sustainability, there needs to be more work on education and educating at the highest levels, because there's a huge learning curve that I think is or can be daunting for building owners, for companies. And I think right now we're in this phase of sort of corporate responsibility where it's more of a marketing play, and there are definitely marketing benefits, but now when it comes to actual execution at the deepest levels, I think that's where people get a little afraid. And so we haven't seen as much buy-in to do this at like massive scales, but there are great examples of people who have done it, and there just need to be more. And I don't know, Jacqueline, if you have, I'm sure you have many thoughts on this as well, so I'll let you talk next, but that's my take, is just policies and incentives that are lacking.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, obviously there's politics, which has a huge impact, right? I think we know certain policies we really kind of need to put into place, including costing of pollution and carbon properly in our economic system. And there's a lot of resistance to change by those companies that use current kinds of technologies that are entrenched and have the political ear of many people. And we know there's disinformation also, so it's very difficult also just to sometimes do the education. And in my field, we're looking a lot at transport, where we want to really shift investment away from cars and highways. Actually, we don't want the cities planning more highways. Towards public transportation, towards cycling, good pedestrian pathways, and also electrification, which really requires public investment. So I think we're all saying you need a strategy for public investment, which we're seeing some investment and substantial investment in the market itself, but there's certain things like, for example, the electric car, it's a superior technology. So anyone who then gets into an electric car will love them. They're quiet, they're not polluting, and they actually work better and lower maintenance. So it's win-win-win. We can improve some of the technology around batteries and particularly also thinking about how we recycle batteries so we don't create another environmental problem, including like the extraction of minerals for parts and things like this. But we need people to see that there's electric charging infrastructure for them to feel comfortable that they're going to get like an electric vehicle and they're not going to get stranded somewhere. So it's a superior technology. You know, car companies are not marketing them as strongly, but I think if there was public investment in outreach, we'd see an acceleration of that. So, you know, and then once people, I think there'll be a tipping point, like once people see that this is really great. And our cities become quiet. That's what I was talking about, like going out to the countryside, you know, these cars are quiet. It'll be like a whole different city experience. And, you know, so I think that there will be this tipping point, you know, when this superior technology really kicks in, but we have a lot of work to get to that point, and we shouldn't underestimate the importance of a national vision and strategy and resources.
To the point, I want to add to that. I mean, to the point about, well, to the tipping point that you mentioned, I think what you know, also leads to that tipping point is when sustainability is accessible and equitable to people, and we're, you know, in some ways so far from that, and it's, you know, sad that the people who are, you know, who need sustainability the most arguably are the ones who are living in the worst built environments. They have the least money to spend towards some of these technologies, which can often be very expensive. And so I think that once we do come out with more products that can be used by the masses, that's when we'll ultimately reach like this next phase in our evolution. But yeah, I think that's obviously a big task, and, you know, there's no telling how long that will take.
Yeah, the equity point is really, really important. I would say with electric vehicles, with rebates and things like that, they're really starting to get very competitive. And then I think it's interesting in New York City, you know, a lot of lower income people use electric bikes to work for deliveries and things like that, and then they get banned. So even though they could really be seen as people who are sort of at the forefront of an important change. I mean, that's shifted now, and even our city bikes, we now have electric bikes we can use. So that access, making these new technologies and approaches accessible to everyone in a fair way is really, really important. So I really would agree with you on that.
And
Yeah, I guess one of the other issue, I'll just add another issue to this topic is bureaucracy at the city level, which really slows down the innovation process. For example, in urban agriculture, for about 6 years, commercial urban farmers have been lobbying the city of New York for a bill around urban agriculture, and probably decades before that, the community gardeners that were here first really have been lobbying to have their land protected, to have some recognition. And it's just made so little progress. And I still get contacted by the city this day by new people that have come into the job, and they haven't stored their documents properly from all the past work. And so the private sector has to kind of repeat saying, this is what we still want, this is what we still need. And so it's very difficult to innovate in that environment.
yeah, so there's two things based on what you guys are saying that I'd love to dive deeper into. One is that sort of climate justice, environmental justice angle, and the disparate impacts that a lot of our sustainability issues have on different populations, and the connection to health. So Dominic, in particular, you've really focused on the built environment and health as it relates to sustainability. Can you speak a bit about that in terms of the environmental justice angle, how health relates to that, how health relates to sustainability in general? Each one of the visions that you laid out, I think it's both more environmentally sustainable, it lessens our impact on the environment, but it's also just better for the health and well-being of people, which is ultimately what it's all about for a lot of us in the environmental community.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, the word politics was used, and I think of sustainability, and I guess things have changed over the past 6 months, but, you know, public health was and still is something that everybody on both sides of the fence can rally for, and to obviously we're in weird times right now, but sustainability, since that term was really coined, it has always been a highly politicized thing, and I think in some ways it's because the impact is not always direct or directly felt by the people making decisions. And so I don't know, I think public health and adding a public health lens makes it like really personal and direct in a way. And so I'm glad to see that sustainability and public health are being seen as one and the same, that climate change is being seen as a public health issue, which it is, and that hopefully that will give us even more momentum to drive progress further. Because as we're seeing in California and everywhere we're having natural disasters, there is a huge public health issue there. People can't go outside. People, again, going back to the equity part, the people living in the worst built environments, the people that have been in or disproportionately hit by this pandemic, are living in the worst homes and housing. And so yeah, I mean, it's all part of the same conversation. And I do, again, just concluding, just hope that this public health element will help us make some progress as it relates to environmental sustainability, and that it's just another incentive, another point worth making every time that we have these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in really quick on that,
Yeah.
I do think that there's actually a big opportunity. This is something I talk to a lot of people about, that I think the average person, this is an example I give constantly, I even gave it on a panel earlier today, so anyone that's on multiple panels, you've heard this many times already. But I think, for instance, like organic food is a good example where a lot of people who buy organic food, yeah, they feel great about the environmental sustainability aspect of that, but what actually motivates them is probably that they have a belief that it's better for the health and wellness of their families. And this is something that I talk to a lot of people in the sort of sustainability communications consulting that I do, where it's like, focus on the thing that's most personal to them. And what's most personal to you is yourself and your family, and then sort of in concentric circles going out from there, your family to your community to your city. And obviously one of the big challenges, this is not news to anyone, with climate change is it has always felt just so big, so abstract, so intangible. And maybe this focus a little more on environmental justice maybe could bring us back to that health angle that has proven successful with past environmental issues, where really making it that visceral health connection could actually benefit us greatly, I would think. I do want to mention too, because I forgot to mention it earlier, if anyone does have questions or comments throughout, you can populate there. Someone said, hi, Dominic. So that's for you, Dominic. But if you have any questions or comments throughout, you can pop them into the Q&A. For most of you, if you're on a computer, it will be down at the bottom of the panel. You can click on that. Yeah, did you guys want to chime in about the health? Do you have anything to add on that? In particular, Jacqueline, I would be curious about the transportation issues around health. There's obviously a big intersection between sustainability and health issues there.
Oh, enormous. I would want to emphasize what you're saying, that the messaging is really important. There's a lot of studies that show if you tell people, oh, you should do this because of climate change, it's like you say, it's super abstract. And also you can end up with a backlash. And the truth is that a lot of things that we need to do are actually things people really like. And if they were encouraged to also participate in creating these solutions or being part of them, whether through a community garden or by, trying to do some biking and, just it's fun. And it's also, improving the amount of green space, which will cool us down as climate change is happening, is also, beautiful and has all these other benefits for us with, mental health. And then of course with transportation, emissions are a huge problem and they are very skewed often. There's a huge environmental justice problem where a lot of the communities that have high levels of asthma, are communities that traffic goes through, freight, like the South Bronx here in New York. So, and yet a lot of those people don't own cars. So there's huge injustice problems. But the truth is most people, we saw this with COVID, that when the emissions went down and they could see blue sky and they could feel the cleaner air, that they were delighted with that. They were asking, well, how do we keep this going? And you can say, well, there's lots of ways we can really start to work on this, from increasing tree cover to to filter pollutants, to moving more of our effort into public transport and cycling and good infrastructure, to electrification, which Gavin Newsom now in California is saying, like, after the horrible wildfires, like, let's try to accelerate these movements. So I just really want to reiterate that this this connection to our well-being as humans and our community is really, really important, but we should also make people realize that participating in this and these solutions are great. Like, we'll enjoy them. So it's not like, oh, this is so much work. It's really getting the government to do things that we will really love. So
I have something to add to that, because that's I love how powerful that message is, and we saw that basically become successful today, and in a way, with the open streets. And I don't know if I'm sure all of you have followed that, and that was so participatory. People experienced that and they felt the benefits. And when we were all told that that was going to be taken away from us, nobody wanted that to happen. And so now it's permanent. And now that is basically we're in a historic and transformational moment, because everybody rallied, everybody got kind of worked up about the idea that it would be taken away. And so having those examples that you engage with and that you experience personally, it just drives you and motivates you in ways that you wouldn't ever think you'd be motivated. And so I love that example today, and definitely want to celebrate that.
Yeah, I agree completely that empowering on the individual level is so important, and connecting it to an individual's well-being and health and their life in the city that you really painted that vision for really well is excellent. But I also think it's about empowering the change makers, the people that really want to build businesses around solving these problems, and just how much an amplification of that impact can happen when you find those individuals and you get them through their first hurdles of understanding the sustainability challenge they're interested in, whether it's transportation or buildings or food. And if you can give them those tools, again, that I emphasize, I think that is also a way to connect sustainability to this really amazing spirit we have of social entrepreneurship in the world right now, with these next generations coming online especially. So what example of that is the city of Paris, created an annual competition in response to the heat island issues that they had with thousands of French individuals that died from the heat wave there. And so they said, we're going to create 100 hectares of green space in Paris, and 30 hectares of that is going to be urban farming. So when we spoke to them about, well, how do they do that? I said, you need to make the city the canvas, create opportunities for people to apply for available spaces in the city, and create a sort of incubator out of the city itself and observe and learn along the way. And they did that, and they've achieved 16 hectares of their 30-hectare goal. And they've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants from entrepreneurs that were just kind of waiting for the opportunity to get a deal on a space in such an expensive city like Paris to develop some agricultural solution and help impact that reduction of heat island effect. And so what we're doing at Agritecture is we're creating tools like our designer software, where entrepreneurs can estimate the CapEx and OpEx of some of the most complex agricultural systems online, and make that a lot easier, and even work with cities to run competitions through that software as well, so you can get standardized applications. Again, just smoothing that process, because the energy to change is there, just as the technology to change is there, and just as the kind of will of individuals is there to participate if you make it easy for them.
And I think related to sorry, Jacqueline, did you have something else?
Oh, I'd just say that there's a direct parallel in transportation, where we're really pushing for, like, anonymized, so privacy is respected, open data, and a huge amount of innovation happening, right, so that, people can access mobility services on their phone, don't really need to own a car per se, that they can access, really great information on how to get from A to B using different modes. We can even incorporate how much carbon that involves to get, but by opening up this data and creating an ecosystem of really wonderful, tech entrepreneurship, we're seeing some real gains. I can give you lots of examples, but I just wanted to, back up what you were saying, so.
Yeah, one of my favorites is the Remix software. Have you seen that software, Jacqueline? It's like
yeah, it's great.
that's what we want to do for agriculture, right? So we want to be able to have city planners run scenarios like that for agriculture in the future. But it's a great software, and I think really fits what you're describing on the planning side, at least.
Yeah, just so people know what Remix is, it's really like a software where you can start to see plan different bus routes and what the implications would be, so that you as a citizen can think of yourself as a planner and give input. So it's wonderful. It's really democratizing technology through really cool entrepreneurship.
Super exciting business, yeah, and impact.
So cool.
That's great. Kind of related to what you're talking about here and a few different threads that I'm following through this. How do we get over the hump of a lot of this stuff though? Because Dominic, the example about city streets. So one thing that I had heard, I think it was on a podcast a while back, that I thought was super interesting, and that Jacqueline, you were talking about, convincing people, oh, this is actually great for you. This is a great new future that you can be a part of, and it's healthier and it's better and it's a better quality of life, et cetera, is getting both decision makers, but also just the general public over that hump of inertia. Because something I had heard on this podcast that I mentioned was, when you tell people about the idea of closing down streets to car traffic, their initial response is, nope, I'm not for that. And it actually is only after it happens that then everyone suddenly is on board and they're like, oh my God, this was amazing. We should definitely do this. And I definitely saw this play out in New York City, where not that people in New York were necessarily opposed to it all the time from the get-go, but they really were on board after they saw it happen, where everyone was just like, we should have streets open like this all the time. It's amazing to have all this outdoor dining. It's really just this incredible experience of all these people out on the street. And it really created a different feel for a lot of parts of the city having that, but it really required just doing it. And how do we get over that sort of inertia of convincing people, no, you'll actually like this once it happens? And I think we saw something similar with bike lanes, for instance. Everyone fighting bike lanes and turning Broadway into a much more pedestrian-friendly thoroughfare. Everyone was like, oh, it's just gonna cause a headache with congestion and traffic is so bad already. And then once you experience it, people like it. But how do you get over that hump, both with decision makers, which, Henry, you were talking about, just how crazy slow city government can be, for instance, and then the general public. Do you all have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just jump in because you used the transportation example really quickly, and that is fun and joy is part of the example. So what a lot of cities globally are doing is they're having car-free days, and they link them with festivals and free museum trips. And so you make it fun. It's like, we're having a festival today and we're gonna shut down some of the streets. And then, like you say, when people actually experience that, it becomes really real. Like, wow, this is safe for my kids to ride around in. It's quiet, and actually, there's all these pictures on Twitter of these streets in New York being shut down, and all these little kids and people talking and drawing and painting, and it sort of becomes a festival even when you shut the streets down. So, I think I take my cue from a lot of these wonderful young climate activists, that I think there really is a role for joy and fun, in getting people to understand, to kind of get them to buy into these, these movements of where we need to go. So.
Yeah, I would add to that the, especially in New York City, I mean, the private sector has a huge opportunity to create these models of what a future city or space can look like, and also cultural institutions. And I'm thinking like the Met, for example, has, for anybody who's been up there this fall, they now have free bicycle valet. And you see that and you think, oh my gosh, that is amazing. This should be all over the city. And all it takes is that one idea to be planted and then come back, summer and summer again. And then people start demanding it. And so, yeah, just really just reinforcing what Jacqueline's saying, where there has to be this joy to it and a betterment of your quality of life. And, often we look at other cities and you're like, oh, Barcelona has the super blocks and Amsterdam has this. And those things are always lost on people because they're like, okay, sure, that's in Amsterdam, but we're in New York City. Where is that example here? And that's what we need to drive change. And yeah, so I love this conversation. It's great.
I don't think we answered the decision maker
Yeah.
one, but Henry, you seem to have I don't know, maybe Dominique too, more experience.
No, I think
Yeah.
you both were kind of getting at the same idea, that it's like you have to have some examples that maybe start out on a small scale, like the street closures, and look to other examples and be like, yeah, look at this Barcelona and Amsterdam. Like they actually are really enjoying that. That I think just leading by example in a lot of ways. That's definitely true. And I think that that's something that we've seen just on climate over the last few decades anyway. That anytime I would go to any one of these like United Nations climate talks, the belief was, yeah, nothing is happening at the highest level. There is no real robust agreement coming out of this. But I'm a city, you're a small business, you're a big company, you're a regional government. We're all doing different things. So let's work together around this and let's have partnerships around that. And kind of like that hodgepodge of incubator of like just leading by example. That's what I've seen happen. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone agrees that that's enough to address climate change, but that's kind of the roadmap that we've seen so far for success. And New York City has been a part of that, but a lot of different organizations and entities around the world have been a part of that. Yeah, and then I guess one of the other things that we wanted to talk about, actually, I'm gonna have a question here that Emily had from the chat. How do you get landowners and developers to embrace greener strategies? For instance, positive power buildings, et cetera. And how do you make it more affordable to cash-strapped small businesses to make their buildings greener?
I'm more focused on health, but I mean, definitely have these conversations with building owners. And I'm just rereading the question here. Yeah, I mean, I think engaging, and this is I mean, there are many approaches to doing this, but trying to pilot these efforts and build a business case that actually is relevant to the building owner. And I think getting them to buy into testing this and building their own case, I think can be quite effective in getting them to embrace it, because it's one of those things where if you're pointing to something that somebody else did, that can only go so far and convincing somebody that they should do it. But if you can do it on a small sort of test, like you can build a test case, I think that can be much more effective. And you then start building the financials around it, and you understand how to replicate it and how you operate a building, how you manage buildings. Because for large building owners, and I know there's a question about smaller ones, their operations and management are sometimes templated across buildings at portfolio levels. And so just figuring out how to do that at scale within portfolios, but it all starts with one project and using that as the beacon. But for small businesses, I mean, I think that is, and I don't want to take up other people's responses, but that is where I think, I mean, the city has a huge responsibility in helping with tax credits. So, for example, there's a safe and healthy workplace tax credit that is being negotiated right now in the next package, if it happens, which is helping small businesses who have taken on extraordinary expenses to reopen and to keep their businesses operating in this COVID era. And so it takes things like that to really help small businesses, and also public-private partnerships. But I think that some of those things really had to happen at the city level, at the government level, I guess.
Yeah, I would just say also that, yeah, New York is a complicated city, as Henry pointed out, but they have done some really important steps. And I think the Climate Mobilization Act and Local Law 97 is a really good step in the right direction, where larger buildings are going to be fined if they don't sort of retrofit to reduce their emissions. And, it makes sense to retrofit because you're going to save energy and you're going to save costs in the long run. And then if there is a way to create more of a fund, whether coming out of some of those fines or because some of them probably will not comply, or, which I know the city's trying to do, is create some financing for smaller businesses. Financing is really, really important. And then this ties in with the bigger Green New Deal idea, because those jobs in retrofitting these buildings and the small businesses that can benefit from being part of that and bringing their innovations to bear are enormous. And that's where, again, I think we need some real public investment at the national level to address these issues. And then again, it could be win-win-win for all of us, right? We're mitigating, we're adapting. Also, a lot of these buildings will be better cooling and heating systems, and we're providing lots of great jobs and lots of space for innovation. But it takes a kind of leadership that we need to mobilize to get as citizens.
Yeah, I think sustainability can be very exciting and fun, as was mentioned. And when it comes to developing real estate, that is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be an early adopter, to have an advantage over your competitors. And I think when I work with developers, I try to sell them on the fact that, yeah, your first facility, your first farm integrated to your development may be more expensive, but that pilot will drive forward legislation that will give you a competitive edge as well. It's going to drive forward interest in your projects. And you're going to know more about this as this trend continues. So it's really about observing, what do people want and how does sustainability relate to that, not in a greenwashing way, but in a, look, this is a real opportunity in front of us right now. It's going to take a little bit more work the first time, but as we move forward, it's going to be a lot more efficient after that. I think for individual businesses, that is a complicated one. I guess my advice would be, to encourage them to have a sort of method to find what is the highest ROI impact they can make, and bring that into the culture of the company as a starting point. If they bring it into the culture of their business in some way and start with small actions, I believe that over time they will start to inherently become more sustainable in their actions.
Yeah, and I think fortunately, in some cases, the economics are working in the direction of sustainability, that there actually are some good incentives for people to move in the right direction. And related to the whole environmental justice angle that we were talking about earlier, over the course of the history of sustainability, people have often rightfully associated sustainable options and choices with more expensive options. And that has just a lot of times been the case. I do think that fortunately there are a lot of examples of that changing. So with community solar projects, for instance, at Earth Day Initiative, we work with community solar projects where people can become a part of a large scale solar facility in their area, but the economics have been such that you're not paying more for that anymore. It used to be a sort of thing that people would have to opt to pay more for that energy, and it was something that you did because you wanted to make a positive impact on the environment. But any of the community solar projects that we work with now, it's actually you're saving money, and the economics have just shifted in a way that everyone can be a part of it. And I think, Jacqueline, you said, or someone said, it's a win-win-win, that there's really just like no reason not to do it. And fortunately, some of those decisions, including with the built environment, I think are moving in that direction. One of the things we already talked a bit about is just examples of who's doing this right. Like, where is this happening? You've alluded to some examples, but I don't think everyone here has really gone through the full list. But Dominic, you mentioned like Barcelona and Amsterdam, and we've talked a bit about New York City. There's some things that New York City is doing right. But what are some examples in each area of your expertise where you think at a city level, or it could be a community, a smaller community within that, or a nonprofit, or for-profit, whatever it is, like who's doing stuff right here and what is inspiring to you in the space that you work in?
Yeah, I mentioned the city of Paris, I think is a really interesting example because they used to see New York as the leader in urban agriculture. And I think that they've made really strategic observations of what other cities have done and made quite a good plan and implemented that plan quite effectively in a city that's complicated. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of historical buildings, there's a lot of difficulty in getting projects going forward there. And I think they've been able to make an interesting impact. The city of Atlanta has a director of urban agriculture, the first director of urban agriculture. And I think a big part of making an impact in the areas that I'm interested in, which is, urban food, is really to have leadership in place. And one of New York's biggest flaws that doesn't have someone responsible for that food system in a meaningful way consistently. And so I think that leadership example is a good one. In Canada, there's really just so many incentives for these farms to begin, especially if they use certain sustainable technologies, if they're hiring engineers and creating economic development from that. So they're able to really grow. Canada's technology sector around ag tech is advancing and expanding globally as a result of that. It's a really good example too. I think the Middle East is an example of kind of how a big announcement can galvanize a lot of interest, a little bit more extreme than the Paris example, but they make announcements about building the biggest farms in the world and building 10 of them, or creating whole new ag tech free zones. And, and that does work in that region to actually make quite a bit impact. And we're going to see enormous growth in these kind of high tech local farms in that region, especially as part of these cities.
One quick question before we hop into someone else, but you mentioned the Canadian example that the incentives are there. I don't know if you know enough about sort of how those incentives were put in place, but why did that work? So we're talking about like, we need policies, we need incentives, but like a lot of times those are the things that are lacking and it's just such a struggle to get there. But why do you think it worked in that case that in Canada, they've actually put some of those incentives in place?
I think there are incentives in New York actually that are pretty good across different sectors. They just don't apply to the sector that I work in any meaningful way. There's a lot of money in New York's being given to nonprofits as it relates to urban food, which I think is great. The Brooklyn Borough President's Office has given a lot of money to urban farming in schools. These are all great things. I just think around the economic development and technology piece, there really hasn't been, it just hasn't been very smooth. It hasn't been very recognizable for this kind of technology. While in Canada, it's like, if you have mechanical engineers on your team, they want to encourage engineering. And so they'll give your company money, for example, and that just happens to also impact the ag tech sector, as well as other sustainability and engineering sectors. So it's just because you fit within the realm of the category, and here it's just a little bit more divided between sectors. It's a little bit less clear. Or here, I'm in Rotterdam, but in New York, where I typically live.
On the vertical farming, or I guess urban farming, sort of urban enough. There's this project in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I spend a decent amount of time, and I just pulled it up because I wanted to really like explain what this is, since I have an expert on here. So, so Jackson, the city of Jackson, Wyoming, developed this parking garage, and there was like this little sliver of land left, and they didn't know what to do with it. It was 1/10 of an acre, and I guess this woman who was a former New York City architect had been doing research around vertical farming, and this site happened to be the perfect sort of size for it. And so it's a 3-4 story building that is a vertical farm that is producing, I think 100,000 pounds of produce that is, or it's replacing 100,000 pounds of produce that's normally brought in each year. And so it's like this beautiful example of a public-private partnership in a small town. And now they're working to develop a model and essentially work as developers to bring this to other cities and to expand its applications. So this was like a small little, test, like a pilot really, that they hope to make 50,000 square foot ones and 100,000 square foot ones, and they also use it as a workforce development tool as well. So not only is it sustainable, but it's also providing these jobs to people largely that have disabilities. So 20 out of the 40 employees have disabilities, and they've matched the roles that they take on in this organization with their, what they're comfortable with. And so I highly recommend anybody listening to check it out. It's just one of those that to answer your question, a good example of a public-private partnership, really, that I think has a really long-lasting impact potentially.
Yeah, I would just add from like the transportation side that there's a lot of good things going on all over in cities all over the world, and I love how the cities share ideas and help each other out. Lots of good networks. But I am very partial to Scandinavia when it comes to transportation for lots of different reasons. But I love how, for example, in Sweden, they have a Vision Zero, you know, like we're going to have no fatalities. We're going to build our cities to design for that. So they're really safe and lovely to walk around in. They focus on children as well, which, you know, we haven't talked very much about, but if you really try to design around kids, you often get, you know, really good designs for everybody, especially in transportation. There's Copenhagen, and, you know, that has huge numbers, and Amsterdam. You're in the Netherlands now, Henry. So you're experiencing how wonderful it is that, you know, you can ride everywhere and it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the Netherlands like 20 times, and transportation is very, very smooth here as well. I mean, there's a lot of examples. On the agriculture side, the Netherlands is just a big city that produces more food than it needs. So, you know, it's really interesting from a number of sustainability areas for me as well.
Yeah. And also, I mean, there's lots of innovation as well. A lot of public investment in things like transit, which is really important. We need much more of that here. So we have really high quality transit, so people want to use it. But there's a lot of innovation that still takes place. Like in Stockholm, they use the energy in the winter from the subway because there's a lot of friction, and they pump it out and heat buildings. There's, you know, they have successfully implemented congestion pricing, which is another one of these things that people go, oh, we hate, you're taxing cars, and some people, like, you know, they need to drive into the city. But then once it gets implemented, like London's low emission zone too, people love it. It's safe, it's cleaner, you know, but you've got to put that money back into transit so people have, and cycling and things, so people have lots of alternatives. So I think Scandinavia is really moving in the right direction, in part because they also have a really strong sense of taking care of everybody in their society, which I think is really lovely.
It's a good
And their
foundation.
health.
Good foundation right there, right? Just
Yeah, exactly.
everybody's a good foundation for sustainability. Yeah.
To the point of like foundation, you know, building a foundation of sustainability, and I think driving awareness. One building level example, another building level example, big one, is the Empire State Building, and how the Empire State Building and the owner acknowledged how many people go through that building every single day. Hundreds of thousands, maybe, you know, over 1 million people that go through every day, and saw the opportunity to use it as an educational platform to raise awareness around sustainability. And so many of these buildings, so many of these monuments, these large tourist attractions, should, you know, use that as an example to follow, to think about how you can be educating every person that visits your space. And that's one thing that Vertical Harvest does too, is they welcome people in, and they do tours every single day to educate people on the benefits of vertical farming. So that's another piece of it that's, you know, very powerful.
So to wrap up, one thing that I find people always come away from any panel, they always get the question, no matter what it is what can I do? So just connecting this to anyone who actually, you hear about this stuff, and we hear about the challenges, and the challenges are policy, and the challenges are inertia, and the challenges are whatever they are. What would you advise people to do? Is there one thing that people could do to support each one of the sort of perfect visions that you guys have laid out?
Well, I mean, I'm not American. I sound American, but I'm not. But if you are American, you should definitely vote. I mean, that's the most appropriate next one right now, because the country is extremely divided, and there needs to be a lot of bridging of those divides if we have any hope in having the sustainable future that we envision here. And so, whatever you can do in that regard to encourage those policies is going to be very critical in this election and year after it as well. I think that on a personal level, from an agriculture perspective, it's really about just shopping with your dollars and taking an extra moment to consider where the source of your product was. And then if you take that extra moment and you become a little bit more conscious, you can start to make that change in yourself and those around you. And it really can be that simple to begin with, especially in the food system, because it's really driven by your demand. When you buy something cheap, they produce more cheap product for you. So I think that that's also a big thing that you can do as well.
Great. Dominic or Jacqueline, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Henry. That's, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, election day is, I think, 40 something days away. I mean, it's so close. And I mean, so much of our sustainability agenda is, and the future of sustainability relies on what happens in that election. So, yeah, I mean, I would echo that. And as it relates to health, just continue to be conscious of or spread awareness with the knowledge that anybody has acquired today about health and sustainability, and explaining to people the sort of coexistence of those two things and how they can inherently benefit your health. Those different behaviors, like biking, for example, which is the easiest one to point out, but also, a lot of other behaviors as well. So, Jacqueline, what do you think?
Yeah, voting is key, and a special appeal to those young people who have amazing values and really believe in addressing our climate crisis, because they're going to be experiencing the worst of it. Vote, because actually if just the young folks went out and voted on those values, I think we could have a transformation. But I would also say be active, have fun, join a group. If you like investing, invest. You've got great companies like right here to look into, like that's fun. You can explore some of the companies that could use more finance and your support. Community gardens, cycling group, be active and learn. We're all continuing to learn. And really join this movement in this community, because it's fun and it's important and it will make a difference. So that's what I would say.
Good. I think that's a very good note to end on. Well, thank you, everybody. So if anyone's on this and would like to see it, this is being recorded, so we will share it out on Earth Day Initiative social and emails. You can find us at Earth Day Initiative. Check out the rest of the panels. There's one I'm going to be hosting in 15 minutes on the other stage on energy, so join us there. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day or night wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.